Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So welcome everybody to our second talk for this vasa. In our first talk, we were introducing the concept of a gradual training. And the Buddha presented this gradual training in many different places and in many different ways. And one of those ways that we started with talking noble friendship. And so the last sutta we used was in the Anguttara Nikaya. But this concept of noble friendship is also mentioned in Mahamangala Sutta. And so it's something that sometimes we forget. When we're chanting in our morning and evening chants, these Pali verses have various kinds of meanings. And some of the meanings are related to our meditation. Now, this Mahamangala Sutta, which we chant most days, it's actually presenting a full training from the very beginning all the way up to Nibbana. And so what are some of the beginning stages? Well, we have some of them. We won't go through all of the different blessings or auspices as they're called. But one of them is we have this asevana chabalanam. So not associating with fools and associating with the wise. And then another one that is quite very much related is our Patirūpadesavāso. So Patirūpadesa means a suitable place to live, a suitable country. And so this is something that we should consider for ourselves. What is a Patirūpadesa? What is a suitable place to live? And so to help us contemplate that issue, I thought we could look at the life of a monk from who was born in England in 1925. Actually, he was born in British colonial India, but he grew up in England and Wales. And that Bante's name was Ajahn Panyavado. So he was born in India, where it was very difficult to come into contact with Buddhism, especially as the son of a British mining engineer. So he didn't really hear about Buddhism very much as a child. And sometime later, when he grew up, due to the injury, he didn't have to fight in World War II. But at that time in the UK, they did have some kind of opportunity to learn about Buddhism, but they didn't have very good opportunity to practice. So there was some knowledge about Zen. There's some very basic introductions to Theravada Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism. But the kind of opportunities that he was looking for weren't available. And eventually one person ordained. His name was Bhante Kapilavado, Ajahn Kapilavado. And he had been a journalist, and he went to Thailand to ordain. And he came back and he found a group of foreigners who also wanted to ordain. And he brought them back to Thailand. But some of them fell sick and they quickly came back to the UK. So after coming back, Ajahn Kapilavado eventually disrobed, and he, as well as most of his students, so Ajahn Panyavado, he was left trying to take care of this little monastery in England. And so he hadn't had proper training in meditation yet, but he was a very intelligent person. So he had some kind of good Dhamma knowledge, but he knew enough to realize that he hadn't had a chance to practice properly. And so he had in one sense this Patirūpadesa. So he had found a country where he could practice the Dhamma to some extent, but he didn't have this chance to associate with wise people. And so he found out that at that time, one of his supporters was traveling to Thailand. And so he asked him, please, when you go to Thailand, I would like you to find a teacher who is capable of teaching me in a way that would lead to Nibbana. And so the teacher that he found was a famous monk named Ajahn Mahabua. And I think after he had been a monk for just less than 10 years, Ajahn Panyavado, he went to Thailand and ended up staying with this teacher for the rest of his life. In fact, he didn't live as long as his teacher. His teacher lived to quite an advanced old age. Um, so in that time, it wasn't so easy to travel. When he was a child, people mostly would travel by boat. When he ordained in the 1950s, it was possible to travel by plane, but it wasn't common like it is today. It was quite a luxurious thing to do, and also quite expensive. They didn't have the internet. It wasn't easy to make these kinds of connections. So if we contemplate about this Patirūpadesavāso, this suitable kind of place to find the Dhamma, this kind of situation that we're describing is already pretty good. He had a chance to come into contact with the Dhamma. There weren't any wars that were preventing him from practicing, and there weren't any laws that were preventing him from teaching others. But if we go back in time further, if you think if he had been born in England in 1650, well, he would have had no chance to hear the Dhamma. Probably he wouldn't have had much chance to practice the Dhamma. There was a lot of tumult in the country in that sort of period. And not only England, if you contemplate whatever country that you're from, then during what periods in history was it a suitable place for practicing the Dhamma? A time when you had suitable chance to hear the teachings, to suitable laws that would allow you to practice the teachings, proper sort of livelihood that would support you while you're practicing. So in ancient India, it was very much a person-to-person transmission. So people relied very much on their teacher. And so when we talk about this asevana jabalanam, this sevana is attending on a person. It's not just associating with. We translated a sevana or as associating and a sevana as not associating, but it's actually quite a bit more than that. Because people would take a teacher and then they would take almost like an apprenticeship and they would learn from them over a longer period of time. They had a certain set of responsibilities and that person was bringing them into their social circle. So it was kind of a deep relationship. And that was true probably for most of history, I guess. Although things have changed quite a bit in the modern age. So we'll talk a little bit more about these factors and the gradual training. I want to read a little bit, a short excerpt from a Dhamma talk by Ajahn Panyavado about his idea of what the introduction to Buddhism is. And so it's not common to the Thai tradition. This is a very sort of general introduction to the concepts of Buddhism. And it's from his book, a book that was compiled by Ajahn Dick Jinaratana. It's called Uncommon Wisdom. It's available on their website, Forest Dhamma Books. Have you properly considered your purpose for doing meditation practice? It is important to get the purpose right. That is, the reason why you do it. We start off with the fundamental basis of Buddhism, the fact that we all experience dukkha or discontent which we are trying to cure. We attempt to cure our discontent by using cause and effect methods. In other words, we initiate those causes that we believe will lead to the relief of our suffering. In doing so, we search for causes or actions that result in less dukkha and greater contentment. Dukkha can be anything from small irritations all the way up to intense suffering. This is fundamentally what we are trying to remedy. It makes no difference whether we are Buddhist or not. We are all driven by this quest to find happiness. If we're wise and we understand the situation correctly, then we might actually choose the right course of action and manage to get the happiness we are seeking. But because our minds are clouded by defilements, we tend to make the wrong decisions. Due to thinking and acting wrongly, we pile up more and more suffering. Failing to understand the correct way to get rid of suffering, we tend to make the same mistakes over and over again. This is the situation that we are in. In order to reverse that situation, it's necessary to first turn our lack of understanding into correct understanding. If we can accomplish that, then we will truly get rid of suffering. So the purpose of Buddhist practice is to comprehend within ourselves the right way to eliminate dukkha. This is really the whole of Buddhism, to learn how to think properly, how to behave properly, and how to speak properly. Only when we put these factors into practice can we cure the discontent. In order to learn how to think, behave, and speak properly, we must train ourselves. We train ourselves to have a sharp mind, to understand the reasons for the things that happen in our lives, and thus to get to know ourselves properly. By getting to know ourselves, we get to know other people. By getting to know other people, we learn how to behave rightly towards them, all because we know how to behave rightly within ourselves. The means to achieve this is the method that was taught by the Buddha, which is comprised of sila, or morality, samadhi, or training the mind, and panya, or wisdom. If we learn how to practice these three effectively, we can overcome the mental defilements, the kilesas, that cause the discontent we experience. As we overcome the kilesas, the discontent and suffering will lessen and eventually die away. This goal can be achieved. Many have done it already. Countless people have trained in sila, samadhi, and panya and achieved very good results, experiencing high degrees of contentment and happiness. So the way to happiness is the way of sila, samadhi, and panya. So that's an introduction, and it matches very well with our first talk, where we started with hearing the Dhamma, associating with wise people, but it also talked about restraining the senses and developing these three kinds of right conduct of body, speech, and mind. And so the fundamental problem is this problem of suffering. And so when we look at this suffering, we need to examine what it is and where it comes from. And so, of course, there are some things that we're not able to change. And so we have this aging, sickness, and death. They come with being born. And then there's certain aspects that we are more able to change. And by training ourselves first in the conduct, this aspect of sila, then we can, as they say, put ourselves in a more, we can put ourselves right with the world, as Ajahn Panyavado says. We put ourselves in a position where we're not in conflict with other people. In fact, sometimes the Buddha would state his doctrine that way. I teach a doctrine whereby I don't have any conflict with anyone in the world. So this requires a certain amount of wisdom to even be able to do that. We have to understand something about what other people want in the world. And so the Buddha often advises us to take ourselves as an example. So the training in morality, it already requires a certain degree of wisdom. And so we have the three aspects of morality: this body, speech, and mind. And so we talked last time about how we slowly learn we start by restraining our bodily behavior. So we can restrain ourselves from doing things that are overtly harmful to other people or harmful to ourselves. And then we slowly learn to control our speech, because even though maybe you don't very often say, give somebody a whack in the head, but maybe sometimes you'll come out with some kind of sharp remark or very harsh speech. So we slowly learn to speak in a more orderly way, a more beneficial way. Of course, sometimes we have to say things that are not pleasant to other people, but we try not to speak in an unnecessarily harsh way or in a harmful way. And then the most subtle kind of behavior that we have to restrain is our mind. And it's not at all easy to train the mind, but we have to do this step by step. So if we can start by restraining the first two, our physical behavior and our verbal behavior, then it will be a lot easier to train the mind. And train the mind in what? Well, we have this sila, samadhi, and panya. So we have this aspect of developing our concentration. And we have various kinds of meditation objects that the Buddha gave. So we can start with whichever object is most suitable for us. Venerable Paul Clergy likes to start with practicing with the breathing. So if we start by focusing on the breath in a simple way, just the in and out breath, focusing around the area of the nostrils, focusing on the sensation, but not overly focusing on the details that are involved. Just let the mind settle there and try to keep the mind with a balanced awareness. So at first, there might be a lot of thinking coming in. There might be memories from the day. If the mind starts to become more calm, if you're not used to this kind of practice, you might start to fall asleep. You might start to feel drowsy. Or you might start to feel agitated and restless, like that you need to do something. You might even start to remember things that you need to do in the house, something that you forgot to do earlier in the day. And so at that point, various kinds of obstacles to the meditation can start to arise. So we call them the 5 hindrances, which I think we'll discuss in a future talk. But basically the process for developing the concentration is similar for all of the objects. You have to choose one of the objects and then try to focus on it again and again with a balanced mind, whatever kind of obstacles start to come up. Now, at a certain point, the concentration will start to become deeper. And at that time, it's really necessary to turn towards developing wisdom more. Actually, we can develop our wisdom to a certain extent through developing our concentration and also through our sila, through our behavior. It's kind of a feedback loop. As we see the results of our actions, then we understand how we should act in the future if we want to develop the path more. And now we're going to loop back to what we talked about earlier. So part of this process is requires thinking. And that's why we were contemplating about this Patirūpadesa, like the suitable place, suitable country, you can say. So when we're trying to develop our wisdom, one of the ways to do it is to read through some of the Buddhist teachings, some of the suttas, especially ones that we chant frequently, and to think about the meaning. We can also discuss with others what they think it means, and we can go to a teacher and get their opinions about it. We also have various different commentaries that give some kind of explanation. And so this is one kind of wisdom. We call this Chintamaya Panya. So it's the wisdom that comes from thinking. And it's essential for us to train this ability. Because if we develop our concentration quite deeply, when we come out of our concentration and try to interact in daily life, then we still have to use our minds to interact with other people. So we have to train our alertness and our ability to reason in a way that is in line with the Dhamma. So back to Mahamangala Sutta, it's a good place to start because it gives quite a large range of practices. We have the advice that the Buddha gives to associate with wise people, not to associate with fools. We have various kinds of things that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to support our if we have a wife and children, we're supposed to support them, our parents. We're supposed to develop a trade, a craft. We're supposed to develop patience, for example. And we're supposed to have conversations with wise individuals who've realized the Dhamma to some extent. So we can go through the sutta. Maybe we can start by chanting through it in Pali. And then if you're practicing your meditation, maybe when you first sit down, before you focus too much on your main object, you can think about one of the verses. So you can pick, for example, Kanti Jaso Vachasana Samana Nanchadasana. What is the meaning of that verse? What is the meaning of that verse? If you don't know Pali, then you can look at the English or the Chinese or whatever language you like. Now, one of the other objects that Buddha recommended for concentration is the recollection of the Sangha. So we have a group of what we call the anusatis, the recollections. And so one of them is the Buddha, one of them is the Dhamma, and one of them is the Sangha. And so earlier in the talk, we were talking about Ajahn Panyavado. So we don't know if he's a member of the Noble Sangha, if he's actually attained Nibbana to some extent, but he definitely was a member of the conventional Sangha, the Bhikkhu Sangha. So he had taken higher ordination, and he devoted his life to developing the Dhamma. So one way we can develop this Sangha Nusati is to think about some of the arahants of old. Or we can think about a modern teacher, like I mentioned. We can look at their biographies. We can also look at some of the arahants of old, somebody like Venerable Rahula, Buddha's son, or Venerable Anuruddha, who was foremost in the divine eye, or Venerable Mahamukhalana, or Venerable Sariputta. So we have a wide variety of arahants. We have a lot of different stories about them and various different qualities. And so we can look at those qualities, and then we can try to fit them with the verses that we chant. So we have Supatipanno, Ujupatipanno, Nyayapatipanno. Technically, if you want to develop this object, you should learn the meanings of these in more detail. The Visuddhimagga gives a more detailed explanation. So Supatipanno means well practiced. Ujupatipanno means with upright practice. Punyaketang Anuttarang Lokasati, the unsurpassed field of merit for the world. And so you can learn the meanings of these, and you can recollect them in your head. So you can start by thinking about one of these arahants of old, or you can start reciting these qualities in your mind. And if there's like a Buddha Rupa, if you have the kind of statue of, for example, Venerable Sariputta paying respects to the Buddha, then you can recollect that image when you're doing this inside. Supatipanno, Ujupatipanno, Nyayapatipanno, Samicipatipanno. So the practice of recollection of the Buddha is a little bit similar, but maybe we'll talk about that more in detail in another talk. But this is all coming under this second training, this training in Samadhi. So during this Vasa, I hope that you'll keep these principles in mind that the Buddha taught a gradual training. And within this gradual training, we need to train our actions of body, speech, and mind. And we can also categorize this as far as sila, or our ethical behavior, our general conduct, samadhi, or concentration, and panya, or wisdom. So we wish that all of you may be happy, healthy, peaceful, and content, and swiftly attain the peace of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.